Welcome to this session, everyone, on education reporting, how tips for educators to work better with journalists. I am Demario Phibbs-Smith. I am the Senior Manager of Community Learning at the News Literacy Project. I'll be your moderator today. I'll be helping out in the chat, and I'll also be helping out in the Q&A session following this presentation. Joining us today is Becca Savransky. She is an education reporter for the Idaho Statesman in Boise, Idaho. Before joining the Statesman, she was a reporter at Seattle PI, the website of the former Seattle Post-Intelligencer paper, where she wrote about the surge of COVID-19 cases and the pandemic's impact on the Seattle community. Savransky has also covered homelessness and housing in Seattle and reported on stories about the lack of affordable housing in the region and barriers people face in finding permanent housing solutions. Thank you so much for joining us, Becca. I really appreciate your time. We've had really great sessions so far, and I'm really looking forward to your presentation. And the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to start sharing my screen. All right, hopefully that worked. Yeah, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about tips for educators in working with journalists. And I started with just a little bit about me. I am the education reporter at the Idaho Statesman, and I'm also a Report for America Corps member. And for the past year, I have been working as a fellow with ProPublica's local reporting network, and I've been reporting on school building conditions across Idaho. So to start, I'll just talk a little bit about why it's so important to hear from teachers and to hear from educators. So teachers are, the people who are on the ground, they're in the schools, they know firsthand what's happening in the classroom, and they are in contact with students all throughout the day. So they're really, the best people to talk to are educators in the school to understand what's going on in schools. And they have different perspectives than, administrators or families or students. And hearing from educators also really, really helps to combat misinformation. So we've seen, over the past several years, there are lots of allegations about what's happening in a classroom, whether that has to do with, curriculum or what kids are learning and any number of things. And being able to talk with teachers and to hear what's actually happening in the classroom, being able to go into the classroom and kind of report in that way has been really helpful to combat some of that misinformation. And then we can't, know or report on the challenges or issues teachers are facing without hearing from educators themselves. So that could be, kind of a variety of things, whether it's working conditions or, things going on in the classroom, building conditions, any number of things. We really need to be able to hear from educators and get their perspectives in the story. And then just kind of along that lines, it really makes the reporting a lot stronger. And I'll get to this more a little bit later in the presentation. But like I said, it's really difficult to write about, educator salaries or working conditions or policies at a state level without hearing from the people that they impact. So in my reporting and in, most reporters, it's our goal to really be able to show, maybe this is a policy that was passed in the legislature, and this is how it impacts people who are working and going to schools every single day. And also, hearing from educators just can show more impact and can lead to change. And so I think one of the things I've heard from educators over the past few years is just being worried about talking to reporters and not knowing how to find journalists that you trust. So the first thing that I would suggest to find journalists you trust is just to read local news and to reach out to reporters. If you see an article that interests you or a reporter that seems to be covering things that you would like to talk about, or anything relating to education, you can always feel free to reach out to reporters. Our contact information is usually pretty accessible, at least our email, and oftentimes you can find a phone number online too. And we're always really, really happy to hear from educators, even to just meet for coffee, to talk off the record, to answer any questions that educators have, to make them more comfortable in talking with journalists. And you can feel free to over communicate, even if you have an idea for a story, you want to talk to a journalist about something, but you're not sure if it's relevant or if it's newsworthy. Feel free to reach out. We're happy to talk things through, and talk more about what we're looking for and what our reporting process looks like. And the last thing is that to invite reporters into your classroom, even if it's not for a specific story. I always love going to classrooms and to just getting to see teachers and students and be in the school. It really helps with our reporting. And then I thought it would be helpful to just talk a little bit about some terms. I'm sure you've all heard these many times before, but I just pulled the definitions from the Associated Press. So on the record, it's defined as the information can be used with no caveats, quoting the source by name. So that's kind of what you think of traditionally when you're talking to a reporter. What you say can be used in an article, and it can be associated with your name. And then off the record means the information cannot be used for publication. So if you have something that you want to talk to a journalist about, but you don't want it to be published and you don't want your name to be associated with it, you could talk off the record. And then on background is a little bit trickier to define, but the information can be published, but only under conditions negotiated with the source. And generally the sources don't want their names published, but will agree to a description of their position. And so that's all something that if you are talking with a reporter to kind of talk about in advance. These are all agreements between the educator and the reporter, or whoever the source is and the reporter. So it's important to just kind of be on the same page about that and discuss it before talking. And then another thing that we've kind of heard a lot and been asked about is if you can report tips anonymously or talk anonymously. And yes, you definitely can. We understand that teachers can often be worried. There's, fear of retaliation or just not quite knowing the process. And the policies on using anonymous sources in articles, they really vary from paper to paper. And for us, it's kind of determined on a case-by-case basis. But I also pulled the Associated Press's rules on when material from anonymous sources can be used. So their guidance is just that if the material is information and not opinion or speculation and is vital to the report, if the information is not available except under the conditions of anonymity imposed by the source, and if the source is reliable and in a position to have direct knowledge of the information. And, oftentimes we'll have conversations about using anonymous sources when it's a more sensitive subject. And, we're happy to talk about that. And even if we don't end up, using you as an anonymous source, we really appreciate when, anyone wants to come to us and wants to share their story, and we're happy to have that conversation. And then I also just pulled the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics. It has some kind of principles that journalists like to follow. And I think this just helps to show kind of what our goals are and how we can kind of better work with you. So the first principle is to seek truth and report it. And these are pulled directly from the SPJ Code of Ethics link, which is there. So seek truth and report it is, take responsibility for accuracy, provide context, be cautious, and identify sources clearly. And the second one is minimize harm. So this one is really important, balancing the public's need for information against potential harm or discomfort, and to show compassion for those who may be affected by news coverage. So we never want to harm people, especially, those who are in more vulnerable positions. And the third one is to act independently. So that's to, avoid conflicts of interest. We can't accept gifts or favors or things like that. And the last one is to be accountable and transparent. So explain choices, explain, the why behind covering certain things or not covering certain things, to acknowledge mistakes and encourage a civil dialogue. So we're always happy, kind of like this session, happy to explain more about our reporting process and to really be as transparent as we can be. And then I just wanted to briefly talk a little bit about public records. So, laws on public records are different in every state, but emails, so school emails are oftentimes public records. So if you did, want to report a tip to journalists, but didn't necessarily want to have your name associated with it or be the one who shares it, you could direct reporters to the kinds of public records that they might be able to get. So if that's emails, it could be, what to request, what dates, what search terms to use, things like that. So it's good to kind of think about what kinds of things are public and what kinds of things reporters could get access to in reporting different pieces. And then I also just wanted to talk a little bit about corrections. So, reporters try really, really hard to fact check everything and to make sure everything is accurate. And just kind of briefly on, every reporter has a different fact checking process, but for longer stories, for me, will, go through every single line and attach a source to it or attach, a transcript of an interview and make sure I have a way to prove everything in the article. And also as part of that process, I will reach out to people that I've spoken with already and, confirm facts that I want to make sure are right, confirm context. But if there is something wrong in an article, we want to know. So we want to hear from you if there's something that, even if there's something that, seems wrong, but you're unsure, we really want to be able to make sure that it's correct. Because that information is out there, it's going to stay on the website. People can continue to find it. So definitely reach out to a reporter if you want to request a correction. We're happy to talk through things, answer any questions again, and we'll make that correction if there's something wrong in the article. And then just a little on what you can expect when reaching out or talking with a reporter. So we're not looking for gotcha moments. We really want to get out information, report what's happening in a community, and highlight different voices. And just a few things to know before talking with a reporter is you traditionally can't read the story before it publishes. And I know I have been asked that many times before, but it's just kind of a ethical guideline. But oftentimes if, we're talking with someone who isn't used to talking with the media and, they're concerned about talking with us, I'm happy to call people back to fact check things before the article runs to make sure things are correct, to make sure I have all the necessary context. And you can't ask for something to be off the record after you say it. This is always an agreement between the reporter and the educator, the person that we're talking with. And then last thing is just that reporters are, happy to work with you to be as transparent as possible, ensure accuracy, and that we have all the context. So you can, feel free to ask any questions, and even beforehand, if you have questions about what we're reporting on or things like that, you can always ask. And then I wanted to go into a little about some of the impacts of talking with journalists and the impacts of reporting. So first off, it helps inform the public and it leads to raised awareness of issues and bright spots in the classroom. So, while we want to be able to highlight the challenges that you're facing, we can also, look at some of those bright spots. So if you have, you're teaching reading a certain way and it's working so well and you've seen so many students, grow so much, then that's something that we could highlight too, to show, these are things that are working in the classroom. These are, good things happening in the classroom. And then, yeah, also any issues that you're facing. These are, if we don't hear from educators, it's hard for us to know really what's happening in the classroom. And, these things can lead to changes in policies or procedures at a local level. So if the school board trustees passed a policy that is having maybe an unintended impact on educators and on students, reporting these things and highlighting them can lead to change at that local level. And in some cases, it could also lead to new legislation at a state level. And that's oftentimes if we're hearing things from, educators or families or people from across the state, then we can highlight that on a more broad level. So I wanted to go into a few examples just of my experience talking with educators and how that has led to either change or just highlighted issues that maybe weren't highlighted before. So the first one is a story. Idaho gave schools millions to buy into the state's health insurance, and many still can't. So this story was on a bill that legislators passed last year that lawmakers said would let school districts buy into the state's health insurance plan and would lower the cost that school employees have to pay for insurance. And we had heard, and teachers had, and staff members had publicly testified that, health insurance costs could take huge chunks out of their paycheck, that they were struggling to afford it. Some educators in rural districts ended up writing checks back to the district at the end of the month to pay for their expensive health insurance policies. So for this story, legislators were, talking about this bill as solving this huge issue of educators, barely being able to afford their health insurance. But after it passed, we heard from a few teachers, and most of them that I heard from didn't want their names used, but they said, they'd heard from their district that this actually wasn't enough and their districts wouldn't be able to buy into the state's plan. And so, maybe it would help lower their insurance costs somewhat, but it really wouldn't be enough to do what legislators had said it would be. So for this, we were able to, find other accounts and confirm independently that lawmakers were using this formula, funding formula to fund this program. And it was based on staff members that lawmakers funded, but districts actually used a lot of local dollars and federal dollars to fund additional staff members that they needed. So it was just a shortfall in the funding. And then this story was kind of a combination of hearing from families and hearing from educators. So this one is on dyslexia. We felt like we failed him. Idaho parents push for resources for dyslexic children. So I basically was, hearing from a lot of families that their kids weren't learning to read, and their kids were diagnosed with dyslexia and they weren't getting the resources they needed in school. And then I was hearing from educators that they were struggling. They really wanted to help these kids learn to read, but they didn't have the training, they didn't have the resources. So there's this process that was, driven by educators and by families and literacy experts to get legislation passed in Idaho to make sure that educators and students had the resources they needed. So just last year, Idaho lawmakers passed a bill that put into place screening and interventions and professional development to serve children with dyslexia. And the next year, the legislature allotted more money toward professional development to help educators get the resources they needed. So this really was, a story and an issue that was driven by educators really wanting to do something and to get the resources they needed, and needing the state to take action in order to really do that successfully. And then I was going to talk just a bit about the series that I'm working on now with ProPublica. So over the past year, I've been reporting on building conditions in Idaho. And we started reporting this series after hearing from educators and education groups and administrators who talked about some of the issues they were seeing in their buildings, and that ranged from, the heat not working. So students were having to come into school bundled in their winter jackets, and that's obviously not ideal for learning conditions. Or things about just not being able to get new schools built because of they were having overcrowding and they couldn't pass a bond. In Idaho, it's really, really difficult to pass a bond. So we're hearing this kind of, from people across the state, and we really wanted to look more into it. And we learned how widespread the issue is. So far we've reported a few stories. It's called State of Repair Inside Idaho's Crumbling Schools, where we kind of really relied on teachers and educators and people in the school every day to tell us what is going on, and why this is happening and how it impacts students. So the first story we reported on, we went up to North Idaho. This story focused on the Boundary County School District, titled Collapsing Roofs, Broken Toilets, Flooded Classrooms Inside the Worst Funded Schools in the Nation. So this story kind of came together after, like I said, that initial reporting. We spoke with a lot of administrators and a lot of educators, and we decided on this district because they were one of the many that were having really serious issues with their buildings and struggling to get a bond passed. They were hoping to rebuild their oldest and most outdated elementary school. And we, went up there and we heard from the superintendent and the principal and the maintenance staff about some of the issues that they were experiencing, but we really wanted to be in the classroom and to talk with teachers and to see how these issues were impacting them and how they were kind of materializing into affecting, student learning. So that was a really, really important part of this story. And the teachers, we talked to many teachers in Boundary County who worked at this particular elementary school. And I just wanted to highlight, some of the things that they told us that we couldn't have gotten and made the story much more powerful. So these are a little bit long, but the first one, these are just kind of some quotes and anecdotes that we got from teachers that we spoke with for this story. The first one is on this teacher who has been with the district for decades. And she was actually there when the same school that she was working in, the roof above the gym collapsed, fortunately over a break. So people or, students and staff members weren't in school, but she remembers that. So, Connie Perez, who has taught at Valley View for more than 3 decades, said she does her best to adjust to the circumstances, but on some days her mind drifts to the crack in the wall outside her 4th grade classroom. That's what scares me, she said, the big things that are going to happen. So I thought that was, really important to hear from teachers that they're worried about that, and they know what could happen and, witnessed it and don't want it to happen again. And this next one is just kind of a specific anecdote on the lack of heat and insulation and even the issues with electricity in the schools. So this was from a teacher. She talked about how she had tripped the breaker when she was trying to plug in a space heater. And so because the electrical system couldn't handle it, students were forced to bundle up for instruction. And when we were there back in January of this year, it was 36 degrees and there were several students who were wearing jackets and snow pants during class. And this particular teacher said the classroom can get so cold that she simply places her lunch on the floor near the outside wall to keep it cool. It actually refrigerates itself, she said. And then the last quote I wanted to highlight from this is that, teachers talked about how the building conditions was something that they, thought about a lot and worried about a lot. So this is, to many teachers, the solution is clear: a new building. All you would have to worry about are the students. That would be our sole job. We wouldn't have to worry about the cracks or the ceiling or the bathrooms or them going in and out without supervision. we wouldn't have to worry about any of that, just their education. So I thought just some of these really illustrated how important it was to be there and to be able to talk with the teachers and hear their concerns and hear different ways it impacts students and their teaching and learning. And then the next story we reported in this series was on this $25 million fund that the legislature in Idaho created back in 2006. And it was meant to give districts who couldn't pass bonds the option to apply for a state loan to fix unsafe schools. And it was really meant to be a fail-safe for schools. But in this particular instance, it's only been used twice. And in Salmon, Idaho, it really failed to fix many of the problems that they still face today. So in that school we visited in Salmon, we learned from educators and staff members that the Wi-Fi regularly fails. So we sat in the classroom and saw a teacher actually trying to use this updated technology, a smart board that many teachers across the country have had in their classroom for years. And she had her old lesson planned around it, but then the Wi-Fi failed. So she kind of had to pivot and use a projector, and that's lost instructional time and had to reroute her class. And then we also talked with the head cook at the school, who the kitchen in that school, hadn't been updated for years, and she had to use strings to open broken drawers and go outside in below freezing temperatures just to access her freezer, which was outside. And she told us that, in the past, her hand has actually frozen to the door when she was trying to get supplies. And then we learned, students in wheelchairs can access the lunch line or cafeteria, so they were left separate from their peers and reliant on educators or staff members. And talking with educators, we found out that uneven floors caused administrators, or caused by what administrators believed were frost heaves, posed tripping hazards for teachers and students, and teachers had actually been injured after tripping over some of those uneven floors. And so now this is really another thing that I think illustrates how important it is to hear from educators. We've launched a call out, or we did a few months ago, and we want to hear from teachers and families and students. And our goal is really just to highlight the voices of people impacted by the issues we've written about. So we're working on a story that's really centered around all of these voices that we've heard, to really show the impact, to show how widespread it is, and to be able to take that to officials and people in power and present the facts to them. And so far, we've spoken with hundreds of people, superintendents, educators, and students who are sharing their stories. So this is just kind of a larger example of how important it is to talk with educators and hear from educators. And that story isn't published yet, but it will be soon. Yeah, and that is mostly what I had. I put my contact information there in case anyone is interested, and then I was hoping to hear any questions people have.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that amazing presentation, Becca. It's a thrill to hear about all the amazing work that you're doing on Report for America at the Idaho Statesman. So I guess we can begin questions with this. And as people, if you have questions that you'd like to ask, we ask that you use the Q&A feature of this webinar chat. You can look at it at the bottom of your screen. It's to the left side, to the bottom left. Yep, there you go. Somebody already posted the question. But Becca, I would love to know what got you into journalism, and especially when you think about your role now in education reporting, what got you into it? I asked that because a lot of people don't really have a relationship with a journalist or know any personally, and don't really understand the ethics that go into the work and the heart that goes into the work. So could you talk a little bit about what got you into it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess I kind of started getting interested in journalism in high school, just being on a school newspaper. And then I was really interested, I guess, mostly in being able to share people's stories and being able to show the impact that policies had on people working in certain places or certain conditions. So in college, I was also really involved in my school paper, um, and just a person who read all the news and loved to kind of be in that area. And I had kind of jumped between different types of journalism jobs after college, but what I am really interested and am able to do here and in Seattle is in local journalism, because I think that's where I really get the opportunity to talk with people who are living in this community and form relationships with people, educators and families and students, where I can hopefully we can form a trusted relationship, and I'm able to report on how these different policies impact them or the challenges that they're facing in their schools. Um, and I covered education a little bit in Seattle, but coming to Idaho is when I really started covering it full time, and I've really loved covering education so far. There's just so many things to report on, and I love talking with educators and students.
Great. No, thank you for sharing that. I think when people understand the heart of the work and why people get plugged into being a journalist and doing this work, which is often hard, once they understand the heart behind it, I think they can have a little bit more empathy. So let's jump right into the questions. Eleanor asks, how do you reach out to educators? She says, my station struggles to get participation. What are some advice that you have that's been successful at the Statesman?
Yeah, so I kind of have done a variety of things. I have found the emails of educators at a certain school and just kind of reached out cold to people and shared what we were trying to do, but also said, happy to get coffee or talk off the record or, anything like that. Um, and I've also, gone through teachers' unions, asked the principals for, recommendations of educators who might want to talk. And I think it's just kind of, you know, finding someone who might be open to talking. And even if that's off the record, or even if that's just, to get coffee, and earning trust with one person has really helped to find other educators or other people in the community who are open to talking. Um, so I think it can often, take time, and especially for this series that I'm currently reporting on, we're going into some of these rural communities that we don't live in, and trying to encourage the community to trust us. And I think just always being happy to answer questions or be as transparent as possible has helped.
Yep. I think another earlier in the session, I had someone ask about what goes into the reporting, or like what goes into training a reporter to identify stories. Could you talk a little bit about newsworthiness and the training that you receive as an education reporter when it comes to stories? What does that look like for you? How do you cultivate stories, and what does that look like in the newsroom?
Yeah, I think there's kind of a variety of ways to answer that question. And I think, for us as a local paper, we're going to cover, many more stories than maybe a national outlet will or a TV outlet will. So for me, I'm focused on, I'm on the accountability team in my newsroom. So we're focused on accountability journalism, which is, in what ways can we hold people in power accountable? Um, and so if someone comes to me, with a challenge that they're facing in the classroom, that's something that I'll want to know more about. Um, it can be really a variety of things. And also in determining newsworthiness, that can often be a conversation that I'll have with my editor. So it's kind of a joint conversation of, what would make sense for us to cover. I'm the only education reporter at the Statesman, so we unfortunately can't get to everything. There would be, so many stories that I I wish I could do that. I'm not able to, but
Mhm.
um, we're really happy to always hear things that people think are interesting or challenges that people are facing, or even like I said earlier, there is room for highlighting some of those bright spots in the classrooms. So it's hard to say kind of exactly the criteria we use to determine newsworthiness, but I think that's kind of a conversation that people can have with their local reporters, or with people that reach out to. We're always happy to talk about that.
Absolutely. No, and I think that's something that I hope that people walk away with today, that journalists are accessible. They're your neighbors. They're people that live in the community with you. They're everyday people just like you are too. The next question I had is, what ways, or do you have any advice for journalism students or schools that have journalism programs or don't have them, but want to give students practical experiences learning about journalism or the practice of journalism?
Yeah. I guess first off, I would say reporters often really love to talk with students who are interested in journalism, because that's often really exciting. We love to help in any way we can. And for students who have a story that they think should be covered, um, I would say, to encourage them to kind of to go for it. And I don't know if that's for, you know, working for your student newspaper in college or in high school even. I think those kinds of experiences can be really, really great. It's, really similar, I would say, to a lot of things I do now, what I was doing in college. It's just, you're a part of that community and you know what's going on. So if there are stories that you're interested in, I think the best thing to do is to try and do them in some capacity, and to find mentors that you trust and can ask questions to.
Wow, that's awesome. Are there any, before I let you go, is there anything else that you want to say about connecting with journalists as far as educators are concerned? Do you have any other piece of advice for people that want to get more connected or want to build connections with journalists?
Um, I think I would just kind of repeat, I know a lot of what I've said, but to just please reach out to journalists. We really do love hearing from educators, and educators are the ones who know what's going on in the classroom, and especially with so much misinformation, it's so important to have educator voices in articles and to be able to really show clearly, this is what's going on. These are the challenges they're facing. These are the good things happening. So I would say, yeah, just please reach out. We're always happy to hear from educators.
Well, thank you so much, Becca. I love learning about all the cool stuff that you have going on. It's really amazing to see the different way that you partner with schools and the impact that you help make with these schools. And I wish you nothing but the best in your work down the line. Keep up the amazing work. And thank you everyone so much for joining us for this session. Join us at the top of the hour for the next session as we continue this amazing, amazing News Lit Camp. Thank you all so much. See you soon.